the Orioles are playing poorly when we bring him in. So it was kind of nice, the thought of bringing him in when the Orioles had been playing fairly well. And then they threw the ball all over the field last night, but we'll deal with that. He, of course, covers the Orioles for the Baltimore Banner. He is our friend Jon Meoli, and he is with us this morning here on GCR. John, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing well. Relative to our typical
Yeah,
circumstances, this is like,
it's a miracle.
this is pretty high flying.
Right. Like, this is as good as it's ever going to get. John, I was trying to have the conversation like an adult yesterday where it is objectively a good thing that the Orioles won 7 games in a row, but they did it without the offense really producing a whole heck of a lot. It's not like the defense had suddenly turned the corner, and obviously we saw it come unraveled last night. They really did it almost entirely on, hey, the starting pitching has been stabilized. And that's a good thing, obviously. It's a very good thing, but I still have some trepidation about that because you have innings problems for, I think, most of those guys. Obviously, the 3 most important ones you have serious innings problems with. So it's weird. Like, I don't want to call it smoke and mirrors because it's not. Like, the starting pitching is good and it's real, but I never felt like this was a sign that the Orioles had completely turned the corner just because they had won 7 consecutive games.
Yeah, and that's a fair criticism. We talked about it yesterday on the Banner Baseball show with my guy Paul Moncano, and he was basically saying like he was never going to be able to look past how they played and the reasons they lost games early, and that's completely fair. That's completely valid. I mean, I I I don't know if I was early or late on this, but when they got swept in New York, I was just like, okay, you are never going to be perceived as anything other than the team that got swept in New York, and that is not, the team that is not good. Um, I don't know if that's fair, unfair, but it's the reality. And I think when you put yourself in the position the Orioles did, you're not going to have anything other than, you know, a lot of caveats and a lot of yeah buts. And I think even as this rotation has been for 2 months among the best in baseball, it's going to be yeah buts. There were games before the All-Star break on the front side of this winning streak where they hit a million home runs, and there were games in Houston where they did not. And it was kind of grinding it out. I think they can do both, but you know what happened last night is always going to be in this team's bag. It's always going to be in their locker, and they almost won anyways. That's the crazy part. And
Mm-hmm.
and how long are they going? I mean, I guess they're not. They can't get away with it. They lost, and their winning streak is over, and there's another game between them and the last wild card spot. But it's not it's not something that's going to go away. It's just something that they're going to have to win in spite of. And I think they did that for as long as they could, and then, you know, they went into the science experiment mode. It's like, what if we made 4 errors and still tried to win? And the answer was obviously that they could not.
And really 4.5 because I think everyone knows Gunner should have caught that ball. John, I'm trying to figure out where exactly they need to be to make certain decisions. And it's a complicated conversation because, like, I think some things I think it's possible they could both try to acquire pieces at the deadline and trade away Taylor Ward, for example. I think they could do that. But, like, there's the second part, which is, hey, they haven't signed Trevor Rogers, and he's been pitching really well of late and could potentially fetch them a good, like, I don't want to oversell it, but, a quality lefty at the deadline, even for a rental, could get you something. Where would they need to be in order to justify trading away Trevor Rogers? Where would they need to be to justify aggressively pursuing the many things? I mean, we're talking about multiple bullpen pieces they probably need another starter, and at least one more bat. Where would they need to be in order to justify being that aggressive to get the things that would help make them a viable contender? Like, where would they need to be to go one way or the other here?
All right, so let's start with the downside. I think we're talking about like single digit playoff odds, and I know those are the only things that we can go off of. They have their own models and they have their own, you know, forecasts and projections and stuff. Taylor Ward, on the one hand, is a right-handed hitting outfielder, and those literally don't exist. You can get value for him, but you also can have teams that are looking at it, be like, well, we're getting this guy for 2 months. It's been pretty empty production for most of the season. He's not hitting for a lot of power. What do we want to give up? the Trevor Rogers part, all those things you say are true, and I don't know. I think the Orioles basically would have to be far enough out to have it not matter that there would be 9 Trevor Rogers starts, basically 8, 9, 10 Trevor Rogers starts down the stretch. And if the outcomes of those 8, 9, 10 games matter, if we're really talking about balancing on such a fine margin, those starts would be better than whoever was going to be making those starts otherwise. So I think they would have to be pretty convicted in knowing that that's not going to make a difference. Um, and I think they would have to be pretty well out of the playoff race. You know, we can't do anything about the records of all these teams, including theirs at this point, but they'd have to be well and truly out of it. To go for it, I think the bar is probably lower than we think. I think if the deadline was yesterday rather than 2 Mondays from now, they probably would have been kind of aggressive, because they are in the mix.
And you've
And
referenced before, obviously, the options they have that would need to be on the 40-man next year that there's just not room for. And so they have maybe some ammunition to try to do that.
they do they have a lot of pieces they need to add to the roster this coming off season, provided the Rule 5 draft happens. That would be a that would be a fortuitous development if
Boy,
it didn't.
I hadn't even
But
thought
but I
about
think
that. I hadn't even
yeah,
thought about it.
yeah, I just think that, you know, for everything that has happened in years past that has been frustrating at this time of year, and for all the reasons that we all know that was the case, I don't know that those are these circumstances now. They are leaning into doing risky things. Their cost benefit analysis on a lot of things has changed over the last year, and I think that's because um, there was pretty clear evidence it wasn't working the way they were doing it. So I think they might have a little more stomach for being like, if this doesn't work out, we will be out 4 or 5 prospects that could maybe help us down the line. But we will be able to go to sleep at night, understanding that we didn't give up and um, we didn't, we did everything that we could. And I think that's all like touchy-feely stuff. That's not exactly how they run things, but it's also not completely unjustified because we have seen this team go on a nice little run here. We've seen other teams go on runs. It's possible. It helps when you catch the ball and throw it to the right base and those types of things. But it also, um, I don't think it's out of the question for them to be a little more aggressive than a team with their record would ever be in any circumstance.
Jon Meoli is with us here on GCR. John, I feel like there's two follow-ups that I have with that. The one would be, because this is the question that I get whenever I go on, another show in some other city or something like that. They say, well, is this influenced by whether or not Mike Elias is on the hot seat? And my answer is always, I have no earthly idea if Mike Elias is on a hot seat. He was given a promotion. I presume that comes along with a contract extension. And so I don't know if that's something that they're thinking about. And we hear so infrequently from ownership. I can't even answer that question, right? So this part of it is very difficult for me. Like, would Mike Elias feel more inclined to be aggressive because he fears that falling short of the playoffs again could be reflective poorly upon him? I don't know. I have no earthly idea.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think everyone's kind of on the same level with that. I have been frequent to point out when I've had these conversations that while there was no forecast, I mean, people can say that they knew the Orioles were going to be terrible last year, and when those words come out of someone else's mouth and you're having a conversation with them, your best bet is to just nod at them and
Mm-hmm.
and move on. But
Mm-hmm.
like the Orioles promoted him last year and in before last season happened, before that disaster happened. So all the things that everyone is mad about in retrospect, the offseason leading into 2025, the deadlines where not enough happened to support a team even winning a playoff game, let alone winning a playoff series. All those things were part of the calculus when he got promoted. So it would feel weird if they turned around and were like, actually, um, all those things that led us to this position are the things you are going to be dismissed for now. And the flip side of that is that I think there were some real hard conversations that happened last year, probably unpleasant ones, probably, um, you know, internally within the Orioles front office, with ownership, with other stakeholders, and the outcome has been a team that operates in a material different way. And the question is not whether Mike Elias is punished for the Orioles not making the playoffs maybe 2 years in a row or not winning a playoffs game when they were in there, but like, is there conviction in what is going to happen going forward if they keep operating the way they have been over the last year? And that is something that influences my decision to say, well, I think they would go for it because that's what they're doing, period. Because it doesn't really matter how good. I'm just going to throw out a name, and it's not because I actually don't care. It's just like it doesn't matter how good Aaron Estrada might be for the Baltimore Orioles over the next 7 years because they might be able to get somebody who's better for them right now. And I think they might be just thinking differently about those types of things, and that more so than like fear for his job would in my mind influence what happens in the next couple weeks more so than I hope I don't get fired. So I'm going to just pretend we're good.
All right. The last thought that I have on this topic, and it's one of the most embarrassing. You've known me for a long time. I've said a lot of embarrassing things in my career, but this word might be the single most embarrassing word I've ever said. And I brought it up in a conversation I was having with our friend Jacob Calvin Meyer from The Sun. I said, I think that at this point, there needs to be a little bit of roster maxing going on. And I say that to say I don't think that this team can compete for something of significance. I think that, like, when I discuss Trevor Rogers, it's more a conversation of, could you trade Trevor Rogers, get some pieces, but also look to acquire? We talked about this with Adley Rutschman at one point. I don't think they're trading Adley Rutschman, but could you do that if you're not signing him, get some pieces, but also try to be in the sweepstakes for pitching with control, right? Like, for trying to max your roster moving forward and not sell out for the moment, which doesn't appear to be that seems to me to be fraught with peril. Like, going in for right now just doesn't make sense to me. And that's like, I hate having this. You're right about Trevor Rogers. You got 9 starts. He's been great. But if he's not going to be on your team next year, you're not winning the World Series with him. I don't believe that. So, like, is there a point at which you need to be coming and going? You need to be considering a little bit of all of the above in order to roster max.
Yes, I think there is a point, and I think the challenge with that is that those are two different. I'm bad at mixed analogies, and it's like those are two different worlds you're living in. There are only a handful of teams that would be trading a Trevor Rogers, so you are much happier if you're a baseball front office being like, maybe all these teams set their sights on Skubal, and maybe they have like something in mind that they would trade for Skubal, and maybe we can get 80% of that. I don't know. Pick a percentage. Right. That is an easier world to live in than being one of, all these teams are operating off the same models and thought processes and kind of goals. If there is a starting pitcher who is, basically like Trevor Rogers was a couple years ago, except good, where there's a couple of years of control left and you can have him for 2.5 years, every team is going to want him. You are going to be basically on both sides you're basically in the middle of like a weird Venn diagram. It's like, give us your best offer for Trevor Rogers, and also we are going to beat 5-6 other teams that want a controllable starter who's going to be able to be,
for example.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot more, and like maybe they don't care about that. Maybe they just want the player, and they'll do what it takes to get it. I think we've seen plenty of instances over the last year where they'll do that. I think that all is completely valid. I think it's a needle that everyone would love to thread across baseball, probably, and I think it would happen a lot more if that.
And for some reason, only the Rays have ever been good at it.
Only the Rays have ever been good at it, but that's because they don't. That's what they do. That's all they care about is like, we're going to do this, and we're going to, there's no. I mean, they do push sometimes, but that's just how they live. That's just like the neighborhood they live in, and they don't have to look across the street and be like, well, they're doing that, so we got to do this. It's like they are comfortable in what they do, and I think there's a world where the Orioles were trying to get to that point, and I think I'm glad that they never got to that, because, that would be a less fun existence, although it seems like they win games more often than the Baltimore Orioles do.
They do.
But I think it's just really hard to do that. I understand
the
value
I
of
agree
that.
with you. I don't want it to be constant. I don't want it to always be like, I still think there should be some soul and some heart to this, right? Like, you have a player, you want them to be around, you want to sign them, the whole thing. And look, I think it's been good. The Orioles now have been able to, give extensions to multiple pieces. Like, there's literally no downside to what they did with Kyle Bradish. even if ultimately it doesn't work, no baseball fan should ever be like, let's say in 3 years Kyle Bradish isn't that guy. Every baseball fan should be thrilled that a team is willing to do that. Should always be thrilled by something along those lines. I don't want them to be completely heartless the way the Rays have been. I don't think that's good
Yeah.
baseball. But somewhere in between, I do think makes some sense. John, the third base thing, like, can they get by with trying this with Kobe Mayo more frequently and Christian Encarnacion Strand? Like, is it maybe the moment where they have to get a definitive answer about Kobe Mayo playing every day or semi close to every day, or do we already have that answer and we know it's not an option?
I think a lot of that depends on how long Blaze Alexander is out. Honestly, like I don't really know the extent of his fracture, how long it's going to be. I think there's been a difference. Basically, it's not to say that Kobe Mayo is Jordan Westburg over there, but I think since that Miami game and the changes to how he's throwing, he's been relatively better, and also he hasn't played as much there. So I don't think you're ever going to get like an everyday third baseman profile just because he struggles to hit righties and they're who pitches
Right.
most days. Um, but again, that's he's like Kobe Mayo playing third for a month is probably okay if everything else on the team and on the infield is optimal, and I don't think that's what you can say about this
No.
team. But
No, I don't
again,
think
do
you
you?
can.
I don't think you can say that about the Baltimore Orioles infield at this point. So do you go get something? Is that they already use resources to get their third base cover, and it was Blaze Alexander, and it went fantastically, and you still have, you know, Jordan Westburg theoretically a part of this team going forward. I don't know what that solution is. Um, and you're talking about, probably some, if you're talking about a temporary solution, some offensive drawbacks, and then at what point do you just want to have like somebody who can hit in there versus somebody who is going to make every play? I think that's a conversation they probably need to have, but I don't know what resources go to that at this point.
Yeah, I get it, and I'm probably like. There's always the eternal argument of yes, Kobe Mayo can't hit righties, but like, can you ever get the answer as to whether he can or not if you don't give him more prolonged opportunities to adjust to it? And that's an easy thing to say at the beginning of a season when losses are extremely detrimental at this point. I think it's just far more difficult to be experimenting with that in the moment.
Yeah, and I think he got a decent run against righties
Mm-hmm.
early on, and him not playing as much against righties coincided with Blaze Alexander becoming one of the best hitters in baseball, and Jackson Holliday coming back. Like those opportunities just eroded for him. The difference is that you didn't have him destroying lefties then, and I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he spoke a little bit about when he wasn't hitting lefties, everything was hard. And, then, he started at least doing what he's supposed to do in hitting lefties. And then you feel a little better against righties. You feel a little bit better at third. I think the argument for giving another shot would be now that, he's tending his own garden, as they say, like, and doing the things against lefties you're supposed to do. Let's see what kind of knock-on effect that has for the rest of his game.
Jon Meoli, you mentioned the podcast. Do you want to get a plug in?
Yeah, the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and I do it once a week. It's a fun Orioles conversation, I think. It's a lot more fun when there's not these existential crises going on, but usually there's not. And yeah, otherwise, writing at the Banner.
At Jon Meoli, of course, is how you follow him. Always appreciate you, brother. Thanks for hopping on this
All
morning.
right, talk to you guys soon. Thanks.
Jon Meoli.